Hi there, back again. Here we're going to finish up a little bit on the lipid category, and I'll give you a little bit of something to do with that, and then we're going to go on into proteins. So here we can see well, actually let me back up for a second so you can see where we left off. So here we talked a little bit about trans fats and why they aren't good, and you know, the fact that they can be man-made and sort of a little bit on that. So that's kind of where we left it. But now we want to talk about some good fats. So here we go with the essential fatty acids. And there are two main ones that we can find in our foods. And they are omega-3s, or omega-3 fatty acids, and omega-6 fatty acids. These are the good guys. We like them because they are they are good for us in so many ways. They're heart healthy is what they're calling it right here. Now let me talk a little bit about this idea of omega-3 fatty acid and omega-6. So omega-3 fatty acid is the one you're seeing above. And what you're seeing, so if you can count carbons even on these kind of weird looking ones. So this first, where I'm putting the pointer here, there's the first carbon, here's the second carbon, and then here's the third carbon. Right? Because when we look at the line structures like this, it's just we say that there's a carbon wherever that next, sort of intersection is. So here's carbon 3. And carbon 3 is where we find our first double bond. So here's a double bond between carbon 3 and the next one, carbon 4. But now you can see also that there are actually 3 double bonds here. So the fact that there are these 3 double bonds is also why this molecule is bent as it is. And you can see that there are other things on here that are being left off. Here's our carboxyl group at the very end. So this is one that we like, and we can get this in many foods, and especially things like fish. And then there's the omega-6 fatty acids, which you're going to see the first double bond is going to start on the 6th carbon, etc., etc. But the idea on it is the same, in that these are heart healthy. And we get omega-6s by and large from things like a lot of the grains and nuts, which have oils in them. Let's move on. Waxes, we really don't give a lot of discussion to, even though they're really important. If you were a plant, you would love waxes. So what they do is they prevent dehydration, so they protect the surface of plant leaves. They're also found on bird feathers, just keeping them from getting all soaked while they're in the water, because waxes, like all lipids, are hydrophobic, and therefore that is useful. The waxes, we won't look too much at the structure. These also are comprised of these long fatty acids, and they're also esterified, and that, don't get thrown off by that word, it just means it's going to form ester linkages with long chain alcohols. So remember, glycerol was an alcohol, so this is just basically an elaboration of that. The ones that are probably the most important, that we'll talk a lot about later, but we'll get a preview here, and these are phospholipids. Phospholipids, instead of having 3 fatty acids attached to them, you see only 2. One of them being a straight chain, or a saturated fat, and the other one having a bend in it because it's unsaturated, has double bonds. And these are attached to this glycerol again. Do you see glycerol in here? Here's glycerol, the 3 carbons. But notice there's only 2 of them that are attached to this glycerol. But then the third carbon on glycerol is attached to this group we call phosphate. And phosphate's one of those functional groups that's hugely important. So this whole structure here represents we say this is the hydrophilic part of the molecule. It's called the hydrophilic head of the phospholipid. It looks like a head here. And this is the hydrophobic tail of the phospholipid. So we'll talk a lot more about that later. And so just keep that in mind. Okay. Here's another picture of it, a little bit closer. This is very often the way we draw it, though, rather than doing that kind of an elaborate structural formula, the space filling model. We go to this really quick and easy look at it, this phospholipid right there. Now, why we talk about it a lot, and we'll continue to, is because it makes up the membranes of all cells. It makes up the outer membranes of all cells, and it makes up the inner membrane of the cells too. And many of the membranes have little structures in them. Sorry, many of the cells have structures in them with membranes around them. So this is the membrane. Now, the word amphipathic, kind of think amphibian here, it just means that it has a dual nature. So when a membrane, when these phospholipids get together, they actually form two layers where the tails are inward, they all point inward, and the heads are either outward toward the inside of the cell or outward toward whatever's outside in the cell's environment. But those are generally watery areas, so this is why the hydrophilic ends are toward anything that would be watery, both on the inside of a cell or on the outside. So we're going to talk about the importance of this coming up. Steroids is another group. We've heard of steroids. We've heard of a lot of them because we've talked about them in a lot of contexts, including, inflammation. When people have inflammation, we talk about steroids. Cholesterol is a steroid, and cortisol is a steroid. So cholesterol, we're actually going to see within the cell membrane. It has a really valuable function. It's not all cholesterols are bad. Some are actually very important and good. Cortisol is a stress hormone, so it's in response to stress that we give off cortisol. Now here's just a little bit of the specs on steroids, just like where are they, what are they. So they're all hydrophobic, which means they don't dissolve in water. They're made in the liver. And they are also important as like precursors, meaning that they formed sort of the elementary parts or reactants to making things like testosterone, estrogen or estradiol. They're the precursors to vitamin D and to bile salts. So bile, if you're not familiar with bile, you have a gallbladder. That's where bile is produced, and it's sent into your digestive tract to help to actually break down fats. And that's the end.